Hey guys, Grifton here, and today we are going to be talking about boss armor, armor debuffs, and armor penetration. In my previous video talking about gear, I've mentioned armor pen, but haven't really explained it. So today, I'm going to not only rectify that, but also explain how all this melee damage works for not just tanks, but any physical damage dealers. Now, before you think you haven't seen armor pen, it looks like this. Notice it doesn't use the word armor penetration. Instead it says attacks ignore X amount of opponent's armor. However, it was renamed to armor penetration in Wrath, and it's easier to say armor pen than that whole string of words, so armor pen. Alright, glad we got that out of the way. So to even understand armor penetration, you have to understand boss armor and armor debuffs. And I apologize if this seems boring, but I promise it will make a lot of things make much more sense down the road. So most bosses have about 6,000 to 8,000 armor, and armor doesn't prevent X amount of damage. Instead, it reduces damage. And that's true for us as well. So for instance, as a bear, if you have the full 35,880 armor cap, a boss melee swing that might hit you for 1,000 would instead hit you for 250 because you have an armor reduction of 75% against a level 73 mob. Now, there is a formula for figuring out a boss's damage reduction. Now, you don't need to memorize this or anything, but here it is in case you're curious, and I'll be using this to show how reductions work. Now, before you can calculate that formula, you have to determine the boss's armor. Now, a fellow druid in my guild, Felfirian, shared a very handy chart, and though I can't verify the numbers, it looks close to what I expected, so I'll be using these armor values to demonstrate armor reduction. Now, there are 4 ways to lower armor on a boss. You've got Sunder Armor from a Warrior, Expose Armor from a Rogue, Curse of Recklessness from a Warlock, and Fairy Fire from a Druid. Now keep in mind, Sunder and Expose Armor do not stack, so the most reduction you can do is 4,485, and if you're using Sunder, it's 4,010. For this example, I'll be using Improved Expose Armor, better known as IEA, because it is the better debuff. So let's use the 1,000 damage hit again against Brutalis, who has pretty high armor. According to the chart, 7,685 armor. Now if I plug that number plus his mob level, which is 73 for all bosses, into the formula, I'm going to get a damage reduction of 39.1%. What that means is for the 1,000 damage you do to him, he's only going to take 609 of it because his armor is going to protect him, the other 39.1%. So that makes sense, pretty clear. But what happens if you apply those armor reductions to it? So you take that 7,685 and you drop it down, and it's going to be down to 3,200. Now if you take the 3,200 and plug it into the formula, you're instead getting a armor reduction of only 21.1%. So for 1,000 damage, he's going to take 789. That is a damage increase of 29.5%. That is huge. That's almost 30% raid-wide physical damage increase just by putting up 3 debuffs. That's why keeping Fairy Fire up on a target is so important. Even if it's not the balanced Druid version, just throw it up there. So now that's great. We've figured out the debuffs. We've got the armor formula figured out, but let's add 800 armor pen to the gear. Now, armor pen is interesting because it's the only stat that has increasing returns instead of diminishing returns. It gets better the more you have, and that's due to this being percentage based. So let's take that 800 and subtract it from the 3,200, and we get 2,400, and we'll plug that into the formula. Now that's going to return 16.7% armor reduction. So essentially, if he's going to hit, or if you're going to hit him for 1,000, instead you're only going to hit him for 833, which is another 5.6% damage increase from what you were hitting before. Now, 800 is a pretty solid number in the current phase 4 content. However, moving into phase 5, you're going to see armor pen on almost everything, not almost everything, but you're going to get a lot more of it. So it's going to increase. Now, my current gear is around 800, but I anticipate my gear will be pushing into the thousands, probably around 11 or 12. So for this test, I'm going to just do 1100 to get a better idea. So we're going to reduce it by 300 more down to 2100. And then we do the formula. He's only preventing 14.9%. So that 1,000 damage is now hitting for 851. Now to make that kind of more understandable, because it's percentage based, 1,000's pretty easy to do the numbers on, but let's say you hit him for 3,000. Like you've got 3,000 attack power, you hit him for the damage. Well, that 3,000 originally was reduced down to about 1,800, but now that 3,000 instead is going to hit for about 25,500. That is such a big, 700 more damage for the same, for the same hit is a big deal. The final damage increase is 39.7%, and that is on a heavy armor boss. Let's take a look at a lower armor boss like Caligos, who has only 6,193 armor. So again, we're just going to plug it into the formula. 34.1% is his damage reduction at the beginning. So for 1,000 damage, you're hitting him for 659. So let's apply the debuffs. It drops down to 1708, very low. And now his armor reduction is only 12.5%. So you're going to hit him for 875, an increase of 32.8%. Again, just by applying those 3 debuffs. So let's again add 800 armor pen to the gear and see where that takes it. Drops it down to 908. That's only 7% reduction, which means for the 1,000 you're going to hit him, you're going to actually hit for 930, another 6.2% increase. And of course, let's do that 1,100 as well again for a fair comparison. Bring him down to 608 to 4.8%. And that means for 952 damage instead of 1,000, so you're only losing 48 damage. That's an 8.8% damage increase from your armor pen. Now that's a total final damage increase of 44.5% by having 3 debuffs up and a bunch of armor pen. So clearly armor pen is good, yes, and it only gets better the more you have it. So I hope that clears up what armor pen does, what armor debuffs do, and how important all of this is and how it works together. So if your question is, should you get armor pen gear? I'm going to say yes. It is a very good stat. I hope this video was helpful. I hope it cleared up any questions you had. But if you do have any questions, just throw them in the comments and I'll try to answer them. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, take care.